All right, this should be smoother. Just waiting for it to load. Yeah, it's working now. I'm just tweeting it out and waiting for people to come back on to watch the interview.
Okay.
All right, yeah, we're back. Yeah, sorry about that. I was trying out Restream Labs, but now I'm on OBS Studio, so the connection should be better because this is what I usually do. Sorry about that, everybody. But me and Caleb are back. So we were talking about the synthetic left, and we were discussing how it goes further back than we think. It goes back to the 50s. So Caleb, I want to get your thoughts on forced to vote, how a lot of these synthetic leftists are coming at Jimmy Dore, saying that what he's doing is wrong for calling out AOC, for putting pressure on politicians, that he's supposed to be nicer to politicians, that we're not supposed to we're not supposed to be yelling at politicians. I know you have your thoughts on that, but go ahead and explain what you think. Like, do you think forced to vote is a good idea? And what do you think of all these people that are attacking Jimmy Dore for this movement?
Well, I'm a fan of Jimmy Dore. I have been for a long time. I've been watching his material for years. So a couple weeks ago, I saw Jimmy Dore trending on Twitter. And I thought, oh, that must just be trending for me because I like Jimmy Dore. And then I saw, no, it's trending for all of Twitter.
Yeah.
And I thought, what in the world is going on here? So I clicked on the trending link. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing all these people cussing out Jimmy Dore. Like, Jimmy Dore is awful. He's horrible. He's, you know, and I'm just like, what
Right.
in the world is going on? I mean, you'd have thought the guy had, like, raped and murdered somebody or, it turned out he was the mastermind behind 9/11 or something. Well, what happened was Jimmy Dore had forced the vote. And he basically said that instead of just voting for Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker of the House, the squad should make some demands and demand that they bring Medicare for all to a vote right now during a pandemic when it's a hot issue. Well, what's wrong with that? That's fine. Go ahead, right? But no, you would have thought that he had committed like the worst crime of the century. And it was bizarre. And all these people were just lining up, right? Just lining up like one after another. All these people that have been like selected for us as the voice of the left were just lining up to come down on Jimmy Dore. And what I noticed was that, this had nothing to do with international issues. This was purely a domestic issue about healthcare in the United States and bringing it to a vote. But all the people that had attacked Jimmy Dore over this also were people that supported the overthrow of the Syrian government, also were people that had thrown Venezuela under the bus and denounced Venezuela, also were people that were playing up the Russiagate hysterics and saying that Russia rigged our elections and was responsible for Trump. And then I noticed that in their digs at Jimmy Dore, they would throw in things like, oh, he took money from Assad. Except he didn't take money from Assad. He won an award. And the award was not paid for by the Syrian government. It was paid for by a group of Syrian Americans, like U.S. citizens, who want peace in their country and don't want the U.S. government to continue supporting the terrorists. And it was like $2,000. But they're baiting him. He took Assad money. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, And this forced the vote controversy, it really was a moment that kind of separated the sheep from the goats, so to speak, right? It was pretty clear who's on what side. And all the people that are pro-imperialist but call themselves socialist were also against force the vote. And all the people that were genuinely anti-war and anti-imperialist also were supporting force the vote. If you generally, don't want the USA meddling around the world, and you don't favor new coups and new destabilization efforts, you also want Medicare for all. But if you're one of these Democratic Party grifters who's out there, hustling for the Democrats, if you're part of the Jacobin crowd or whatever, you're not only are you going to attack international countries and follow the mainstream media's cues about who to go after. You might make socialist-sounding excuses for doing so, but you're also going to not fight to demand health care. Look, I've met AOC, and she seems like a great woman. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she's a politician, and politicians are in a situation. Politicians, it's a job. They have to get reelected. You know what I'm saying? And, AOC right now in the United States, we don't have a mass socialist grassroots movement to try and put pressure on AOC to do the right thing. Meanwhile, we have a CIA and we have a George Soros fake left to put pressure on her to do the bad thing. Well, Jimmy Dore is trying to counter that. He's trying to actually, have a mass movement that puts pressure on AOC to do the right thing. And it's very clear that there are forces that are set up not to fight for socialism, not to fight for peace around the world, but to kind of manage the movement and try to manage people that might be interested in socialism and make sure they stay within a certain framework, and that they're just good foot soldiers for one wing of the capitalist class that's fighting another wing of the capitalist class. And that seems to be what's going on here, and we can see where everybody stands, right? I mean, that's the good thing about this, is now we know where everybody stands. If you're against force the vote, if you're against Jimmy Dore, or if you're for Jimmy Dore, we can see what people are about. And you know what the crazy thing is? I saw that there was a poll among the audience of the Young Turks.
Yeah.
And even though the Young Turks went into overdrive bashing Jimmy Dore, the audience was on Jimmy Dore's side, showing that most progressive-minded people in the United States are anti-war, anti-imperialist, and want Medicare for all. It's these movement hustlers, right, who've been set up, the synthetic left, who've been set up to manage people. They're the ones that are trying to lead people astray. But in their guts, most people know Jimmy Dore is right. If you're a progressive, if you're a socialist in this country, you know Jimmy Dore is right.
Yeah, it's the same people, like you said. It's a consistent thing that they do where they align themselves with the mainstream narrative that they're supposed to be challenging, because the mainstream narrative isn't going to be challenging against the corporations. Like right now, the corporations are the enemy of the people. That's who we're supposed to be challenging. That's who we're supposed to be questioning. We're supposed to be questioning the intelligence community, especially after recent history, what they did with weapons of mass destruction, like in all throughout history. But that's what they rely on. They rely on the ignorance of people on foreign policy, on our history, on understanding our civil liberties. And like you said, the same people who are pushing Russiagate, which is a mainstream media narrative, and the OPCW report, who barely talked about Assange, and were buying into a lot of these stories about Assange and like skateboarding in the embassy that he was staying at, the Ecuadorian embassy that he was staying at. Like, it's a consistent thing that these people do. Like, why are they not questioning the mainstream narrative? So I want to ask you, Caleb, what's your take? Why do you think that these people are the way that they are? Do you think that they grew up privileged? Is it a failure in our education system? Is it a combination of all these things? What do you think?
No, I think it's that they have a role to play. I mean, this is the role that they play, right? I mean, the Congress for Cultural Freedom was set up in the United States so that if you wanted to be a socialist or an anti-war activist, you would be the CIA's kind of socialist and anti-war activist, right? That was why the program was set up in the 1950s. The idea was if you were an artist or a scientist or a writer who was interested in socialism, you would come under the influence and start to model people like Max Shachtman or Irving Kristol or Irving Howe or Susan Sontag, and you would be influenced by these people that were purporting to be what you believed in, but leading you under the wing of the system and mobilizing you to help destabilize and to oppose the existing socialist countries. And I think that the same kind of activity goes on in our time. Maybe not as directly, but there's a feeling now that so many people in the United States are against capitalism. So many people are against these wars. There's a need to kind of manage people who are getting interested in socialism. And I think the status quo, in whatever form, whether it's think tanks or whatnot, foundations or who knows what, has decided to select certain people to act as, it's like, okay, we need to have a socialist movement. I guess that's the way things are. Okay, let's find some of our people and they'll be in charge of the socialist movement to make sure it doesn't get too out of control. I think that's what's going on here. And that's what's kind of always gone on to some degree or other. It became, much more intentional after the Second World War with the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, and I think it's a lot more confused now. I don't think it's a conscious effort. I don't think they're sitting down planning this, but I think look, if you work in mainstream media, many people have told me this, that if you work in like regular mainstream media, there are certain lines you cannot cross. I will never forget the one time I went on CNN.
Yeah.
Only time they ever had me on there, right? And they had me on, right? It was like there were all these protests going on against the bombing of Syria, the threat to bomb Syria by Obama. And so I was a leader at that point of a group called the International Action Center, which was started by former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. And so we were having a demonstration that day. So CNN came to our office. They said, hey, we need someone. And I was available to go on like right then. Mm-hmm. So they had me just come on CNN. And I'm in Times Square there, and I'm standing there, and I'm on CNN. And they asked me why I'm against the war. And you can watch the clip. Someone dug up the clip. They have tried to bury it. Someone actually dug it up. And I'm on there, and I just started talking. And I just started talking about, the wars and awful. And I remember I ended what I said with, these rebels that our tax dollars are supporting in Syria. They're doing lots of bad things. And I just talked about that. So as soon as the feed ended, right? As soon as it ended, right? The camera, it's no longer live on CNN. The camera crew, the reporter who's looking at me, they're all just like I had never seen eyes so wide. It was like deer in the headlights, and they were just like, did he just say that? And I can tell what they're thinking is like, oh shit. We're going to lose our jobs.
Yeah, they're going to get yelled at.
They had been explicitly told you are not allowed to talk about the Syrian rebels and how vicious and murderous they are, right? Our government has been arming these extremists that go into churches and cut people's heads off, that bomb schools and bomb mosques and torture people and recruit children and do awful things. And they had been explicitly told by their bosses, this is a red line. We don't talk about this here. And they thought I don't know what they were thinking. They thought I was dumb. They thought I didn't know what I was talking. They assumed I was going to get on there and just say, give peace a chance, brother, or something like that. They didn't know I was going to get on there and actually spit some truth. And they were shaking. They were terrified. And I have never been on CNN again. I can tell you that much. I have never been on CNN again. Mainstream media is very carefully controlled. Look, Anderson Cooper's first job was with the CIA. Okay? That's not a secret. That is a matter of public record. Okay? I know it sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory. And handling the media is something that American intelligence has been doing for decades and decades. Read about Project Mockingbird and all of that, right? And creating public opinion to support U.S. foreign policy. I mean, that is something that the American intelligence community does very, very well. And so, trying to manage people who are starting to wake up and be critical, I think, is another aspect of what the state and the apparatus and the status quo does at this time. And we shouldn't be surprised that there are a lot of grifters out there who've been assigned to kind of give a socialist-sounding message but keep us in line. Look, Jacobin is a great example of this, right? Yeah. Jacobin, there's socialist magazines out there. I mean, for years. I mean, there's been the Workers' World and the Workers' Vanguard and the Revolution and the People's Weekly World. I mean, there's socialist publications like you wouldn't believe. You used to go to anti-war rallies, and it'd be like every corner there was another old Trotskyist trying to sell you a newspaper, right? But Jacobin, it started, and I remember when it launched, they had the guy who started it on MSNBC just to talk about, hey, a socialist magazine's starting. Hey, that's funny. I have you ever seen a socialist magazine get announced on mainstream media? Just to announce it's starting, right? And they had him on there just to announce that it's starting. I remember that. And what is weird is that Jacobin conveniently finds itself, at the time, for example, when stuff started getting tough there, threw Venezuela under the bus, right? And they very carefully find a way to be exactly wrong, right? When Tulsi Gabbard was speaking up about U.S. involvement in Syria, all of a sudden they wrote this big thing, Tulsi Gabbard is not your friend. They know exactly what they're doing, right? And look, I know a lot of great people in the DSA, and if I was not, as a journalist, as a member of the press, I'm not allowed to join any political party because that would hinder my objectivity, right? I do promote socialism and socialist ideology. I can't campaign for anybody. I can't join any political party. But a lot of people I know are in DSA, and if I was not a journalist, I would probably join the DSA right? Just because it's a great place to meet people, right? So many good people I know are in the DSA. So I'm not ragging on everyone in the DSA, but we should talk about where DSA came from. Let's just talk about this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Michael Harrington, the founder of DSA, he was a follower of Max Shachtman. Google that name, Max Shachtman. He was a follower of Max Shachtman who worked for the administration of Lyndon Johnson. And he and Irving Howe, somebody tied in with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, they started Democratic Socialists of America. There was the Socialist Party originally. The followers of Shachtman went into the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party collapsed, and it split into three factions. The first faction was 100% against the Vietnam War, and that's what's now called the Socialist Party USA. Socialist Party USA, they run elections. Then there was another faction that supported the Vietnam War and supported the Republicans. They're called Social Democrats USA. They became neocons. And Harrington and Shachtman and Irving Howe, they formed the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. And they were a group of people that were kind of against the Vietnam War. Like how can you be kind of against the Vietnam War? But they were kind of against the Vietnam War. And eventually they teamed up with Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem, you know, folks know Gloria Steinem. She was like the voice of feminism in the United States in the 70s. Well, if you Google her, it is known fact that she was a CIA operative. She brags about it in her autobiography, that her career started at the CIA. So basically, DSA was a kind of a voice of like liberal-oriented people who were tied in with the CIA and tied in with the deep state. Okay? That doesn't mean that they're necessarily bad, and I know a lot of really good people in the DSA rank and file. But at the top of DSA, you have to admit that there are ties to Langley, okay? There's ties to the deep state at the top of DSA, and that's how you'll notice that a lot of these voices that are tied in with DSA, like Jacobin and others, you know, when the rubber meets the road in places like Venezuela, or when it comes time for force the vote, they're not exactly where the rank and file are at, right? I tell people that DSA is a lot like Students for a Democratic Society. Back in the 60s, there was a mass radical group called Students for a Democratic Society, and it was started by some of the same people, you know, Tom Hayden, Michael Harrington, people like that. But a lot of radicals and revolutionaries joined it, and eventually it became a very radical progressive group, you know. But it was started by some like phony liberals, but it was a place to meet people. So I don't think there's anything wrong with joining the DSA, but you have to keep in mind the people at the top of the DSA are not anti-imperialists, and they're not really socialists. They're social democrats, they're reformists, and they're pro-imperialists. So that's just something we have to keep in mind. We have to be real about who's who on the left. And I've studied this stuff. A lot of people don't know this stuff, right? A lot of people that are just getting into it. You know, I remember when I was a teenager and I found out that there was a communist party in the United States. I was shocked. I thought I was the only person who believed in communism, because everyone I'd ever met told me that communism was stupid, communism, you know, failed everywhere. And I was thinking, like, maybe there could be something good about communism. So I got on the internet and I was like, wow, there's other people who think this. There's a communist party. And then I found out there's like 500 communist parties. And I was like, what? And I learned and I studied what the hell is all the differences between the groups. And it's very educational. And some of it is a little bit minutia and irrelevant, but it's important to know this because socialism is not a new idea. It's been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. And there are many different strands of thought within the socialist and revolutionary movement. And so as younger folks are getting into socialism, they want to fight for healthcare and jobs and education and against these imperialist wars. It's important to know where these people came from. Who are these different tendencies? You know, what's the RCP and the ISO and the QWH and the XYZ? Who are they? Who are they? What do they stand for? And at the end of the day, I'll tell you, I spent 8 years in one of these groups for a long time, and I learned a lot in that group, and I did a lot of good work. But at the end of the day, none of these groups really mean anything. Okay, the socialist movement in the United States, especially since the fall of the Soviet Union, has gotten very confused. I think we need to get back to the basics. We need to get back to Eugene Debs. We need to get back to Gus Hall, class struggle, mass popular organizing. So that's why I'm building a think tank called the Center for Political Innovation, CPI. And it's not a party, and there's people that are in the Communist Party that talk with it and are working with it. There's people in DSA that are working with it. There's people from the Socialist Party. There's people from the PSL that are involved. And you know, it's open to anybody from any different group and people that are in no group, right? I think we need to rethink socialism in the United States because the movement overall has kind of gotten off the rails, largely because of the confusion that came after the fall of the Soviet Union and the conscious manipulation of some covert forces. And that's where I get into the whole synthetic left thing.
Mm-hmm. That is something people need to keep in mind when they join movements, or if they're getting news from certain news networks. Like, where does the money come from? What's the history of this group? You know, how did it get started? Because a lot of these movements have been co-opted, like the Sunrise Movement, and like what you're telling me right now about the DSA. Everybody who joins the DSA needs to be conscious about that, and they need to also learn from people who've had experience from working within those movements. And I love that story, by the way, that you said about when you were on CNN. That should be a lesson that a lot of people should take when they have an opportunity to talk in the mainstream. Like if you're just like a bystander and they interview you, take advantage of that time to spit some truth, drop some truth bombs, because we need to wake as many people up as we can. So I want to read this super chat by Embol Mad Fate. Said, do we have to reach out to the right and independent to push free speech online since the synthetic left has abandoned the values of free speech? I say definitely. And it's really unfortunate, but not surprising how the synthetic left right now is attacking Jimmy. Just recently, he started trending again for having a Boogaloo boy on his show who revealed that he's nothing like the caricature that the mainstream media brought up. And Jimmy Dore was he was going after this guy named Jerry White. I don't know if you saw that interview where he was like, the guy, Jerry White, who's from the World Socialist website, was telling him, no, you're not supposed to talk to these people. You're not supposed to unite with them. And everything that a synthetic leftist would say, like, you're not supposed to talk to these people. He was pro-censorship. So what are your thoughts about that? Why is it so wrong for people to tell others to not talk to other groups of people, other working class people, as a matter of fact? And what are they missing out from history about that?
Okay, well, here, I'm going to answer a couple things here, because since we're on this kick, it's important to know who people are and where they came from. So this guy, Jerry White, that you mentioned, he's the leader of the World Socialist website, the Socialist Equality Party. That used to be called the Workers' League, and they are a Trotskyite organization. And they were a breakaway from the Socialist Workers' Party. And honestly, the World Socialist website, they do some good stuff. They tend to do news coverage about Assange that's very good. They're very sympathetic to Assange. And during the Libyan war, they were not supporting NATO, and they will expose some stuff. So I don't think that they're all bad. But as far as their attitude that you shouldn't talk to people on the right, that's mistaken. Who becomes socialists? Who becomes revolutionaries? Yeah. People that don't have peace with the system. That's who becomes socialists and revolutionaries. People people who, they love the status quo. Everything's great. America's the greatest country in the world. Move to another country if you don't agree with it. And, capitalism is the best system, and our leaders are invading countries because they want to rescue people. It's humanity. The average, person who just goes along with everything, loves their comfortable American life, they're not going to become a socialist. The kind of people that become socialists are people that are angry at the system. And right now, because of the way politics has gotten so nuts, the right wing almost have a monopoly on being angry at the system. Look, let me emphasize this, I do not approve in any shape or form of what was done on Capitol Hill, But let's be real. If you're a working class person and you are mad at the government and you see people charging into Capitol Hill, you're going to think, now those are the kind of people I want to be with. They're getting stuff done. There's going to be sympathy there. And that there probably are a lot of people who, if they knew that the problem was capitalism, if someone explained to them what socialism really means, right? And if they could be won to a left-wing perspective, there's a lot of people on the right who would be interested in becoming socialists, right? And I think that it's the lack of a class struggle message, and it's the emphasis on identity politics, and it's the shaming and the personal attacks. If you listen to a lot of these leftists talk, they don't think the problem is capitalism. They think the problem is average American white people, right? They think average American white people are the problem. Oh, you're a Euro settler. Oh, you have white privilege. Shame on you. People don't join a movement that looks like it's against them, right? People don't join a movement that's message is, I want you to be poorer. You have life too good, right? So if you take class struggle out of socialism and you just make it a message of kind of engaging in hostility to things that people feel are sacred, like the flag, like their religion, right? If you just make it a culture war against things that a lot of working class Americans believe in, at that point, those Americans are going to go somewhere else if they start to be mad at the system. So I think it's the duty of actual socialists and actual revolutionaries to go to all Americans, left, right, black, white, Latino, different nationalities, men, women, with a left-wing class struggle revolutionary message. And yes, we have to counter any racism that these people believe. We have to counter especially this libertarian nonsense. I've been screaming about libertarianism for years. That's what I don't get about all of this, right? Libertarianism, when I was in college and people all started getting into Ron Paul, I looked into what that guy believes. And that Ayn Rand libertarian stuff is toxic. It is toxic stuff. Free market, sociopathic, privatize everything, the virtue of selfishness, compassion is weakness. People shouldn't have solidarity with each other, the individual above all else, privatize everything, let poor people die and starve in the street. Libertarianism is bad, and I will argue with any libertarian. But I don't think people should be punched in the face just for being libertarian. I don't think people should be shot just for being libertarian. I think that we should argue with libertarians and win them to a socialist perspective. And I've been saying that for the longest time. And the left, when I was saying this to the communists and leftists, they said, oh, don't worry about it. We're just going to try and organize leftists. And I said, no, there's an ideological problem. I remember saying to people, all these people that I went to college with that were just the most straight up conservative Bush supporters, all of a sudden they were waking up and saying that the wars were wrong and saying the government was corrupt, but they were waking up wrong. They were waking up and believing in this libertarian stuff. And I was saying to the communists, we need to counter this libertarianism. We need to organize against and expose this libertarianism. Oh, no. We just got to build the movement. We just got to run anti-war rallies. They didn't want to hear it. Well, now, my message is the same. We got to argue with these people and engage with these people. And now their message is, now we have to, declare these people, the Bugaloo Boys, to be toxic, to be poisonous, to be evil, never speak to one, never engage with one. No, right? In Russia, during the lead up to the Russian Revolution, there was a fascist movement that was organized. It was called the Black Hundreds Party. You can read about this. And it was an anti-Semitic fascist mobilization. And Lenin, what did he tell his followers to do? Mm-hmm. He told his followers to go to their meetings, to go to their rallies, and win the people there to socialism. That's what Lenin told his followers to do. If you read the Communist Manifesto, it says that communists support every uprising against the existing order of things, but in all of those uprisings, they bring forth the question of property, meaning that whenever people are against the system, whenever people are mobilizing against the status quo, whenever there's a confrontation where people are standing up against the powers that be, communists go there and raise the question of property, meaning they raise the economic question. They say the problem is capitalism. We should have gone to the Tea Party. That is my biggest regret. When the Tea Party happened, we should have gone to the Tea Party and said to people, you're right, your taxes are too high. They're too high because Jeff Bezos doesn't pay any. Mm-hmm. They're too high because the big corporations have rigged it. And Obama's not a socialist. Obama works for the most vicious, destructive capitalists who want to drive this country into poverty. And if you are really mad about being taxed enough already, you should join the socialist movement. That should be the approach. This idea that socialists should be foot soldiers of the Democrats, that whatever the Democrats do, we just do it louder. That's got to be gotten rid of, right? Yeah. Now we're in a period where it's a fight between the rich and the ultra rich. Most of the rich are conservative, libertarian. They're losing all their money during this pandemic. But the ultra rich, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Walmart, they are making out like bandits amid this pandemic. Their monopoly is more secure than ever before. And there's a fight in the ruling class. And we're in a situation where that upper faction, that faction that is the ultra rich, they are more powerful, mainly because of Silicon Valley. Social media has kind of given them the edge, where they have the edge over media and such. And so because of that, we're in a situation where the ultra-rich have the upper hand. So the more liberal and internationally focused wing of the ruling class is going to have the upper hand. Socialists are not just supposed to be foot soldiers for that wing of the ruling class against the Trump wing. We are supposed to be representatives of the working class struggling to seize power. And we're supposed to be opponents of the global system of imperialism, where a few big banks and corporations dominate the world in the global economy. So if you're a socialist, you are not supposed to be a foot soldier for Jeff Bezos, to protect Jeff Bezos from Donald Trump. You are supposed to be a representative of all working people fighting for peace and justice.
Yeah, and people on the left need to realize this. Like, Put yourself in the shoes of those people who you're calling like fascists or racist or white supremacists. Like, they've been told lies their entire life. That's why they're the way that they are. It's by design that the system is set up to keep us divided, to misinform us about the history of our country, to think that communism is evil, socialism is evil, that the West is the best, like you always say. Like, we are going into all these countries to liberate them and give them democracy. And so some of these people start seeing some truth. They're like, we're in these wars that are senseless and we're wasting taxpayer dollars to go into all these wars. Meanwhile, I'm suffering, but then they're still misguided because of some things that they've been taught from a very early age. Like, they think that it's like the Latinos' fault or the black people's fault, like the immigrants that are coming over here that are taking their jobs. We need to embrace whatever opportunity we get to talk to these people and make them realize, look, I have a similar struggle as you. I'm not your enemy. I'm your brother. I'm your sister. We share a common enemy, and that is the billionaire class that is oppressing us, that is buying off our politicians, that are creating these policies so that we can stay in all these wars, so that they can keep us poor and divided. Right? So you had a trailer that you made recently where you reached out to the MAGA crowd, who are now discovering that Trump is not really on their side. Meanwhile, there's some people that are making fun of them and laughing at them. So you want to tell us a little bit more about that trailer you made? I think it was like around 15 minutes or something.
Yeah, I made a video, a message to Trump supporters, and I said, look, I'm mad about a lot of the same things you're mad about. I'm mad about the big corporations that have ruined the country, but the enemy is not the immigrant workers. And look, I don't think the police should have killed Ashley Babbitt in the Capitol, maybe arrested her for illegally trespassing, but I don't think they should have killed her. She didn't need to be shot. Look at that video. That didn't have to happen, and what happened to her was wrong. Just like what happened to George Floyd is wrong. Just like what happened to Oscar Grant is wrong. Just like what happened to Michael Brown is wrong. And that, yes, it comes down the hardest on the black community, no question. The fact that people are shot for reaching for their wallets. I mean, it is awful what happens to people of color. No question about it. It's far worse, far, far worse for people of color. But look, Ashley Babbitt died because cops in this country have a license to kill. They've been told that, hey, if you shoot somebody, nothing's going to happen to you, right? And the black community has been talking about that because they have been the hardest hit by it for so long. But now, look, it happened to a Trump supporter. And we can all talk about how dangerous it is that we have this police state that is out of control. Look, over the weekend, there were some big protests in Russia, and there was a video that came out of a cop in Russia, and he kicked a woman, right? And she went to the hospital. So I kid you not, the next day, the cop went to the hospital and apologized to the woman he kicked during the protest in Russia. This happened, right? That would never happen here. I was at Occupy Wall Street, and I saw police throw people down steps. I saw police step on people, mace people in the face, club people, beat them bloody. Never did I ever see a cop visit somebody in the hospital they'd injured and apologize, right? I mean, we have a police state here that is completely out of control, and they've been given a license to kill, a license to entrap people and frame people and sting operations, and it's not right. And I think that it affects many different sectors of U.S. society, and that there should be solidarity around the fact that the police state is a threat to everybody, and not just in terms of cops on the street, in terms of the NSA listening to our phone calls, in terms of monitoring our internet activity and reading our emails. The police state in this country is out of control, and people that are on the right and libertarian realize it, people that are on the left and socialists realize it, the black community realizes it, the low-income white community realizes it. We need a mass movement to confront the emerging low-wage police state. But if you make it a culture war, right? If you make it oh, it's worse for you, oh, it's worse for you, oh, it's worse for you. If you make it that way, we're never going to get out of this mess. We're never going to get out of this mess. I don't agree with a single thing Ashley Babbitt ever said. I cannot find anything she ever said that I agree with. But I don't think she should have been killed. We don't have the death penalty in the United States for illegally entering the Capitol. We don't, right? We have the death penalty for murder. We have the death penalty for treason. But we don't have the death penalty for entering the Capitol We don't, and even if we did, she would have to be tried by a jury of her peers. The cop didn't have the right to just blow her away like that. So, people don't want to hear that because she's on the other side. Well, I'm sorry, real politics is not football. Real politics is not baseball. You don't pick a team and cheer for your team and boo the other team. That's not real politics. Real politics is understanding what's going on. And we have a state in this country that works for the ultra-rich. We have a working class that's being exploited. We have a billionaire capitalist class that is murdering people all over the world and driving living standards down here. And what we need is a class struggle, solidarity against imperialism. That's what we need. And, that's not a matter of just picking one side on the CNN cable news wars and cheering for it.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about like history of figures that have tried to reach out to others, like others who with ideological differences but are sharing the same struggles. Can you tell us more about like Fred Hampton and some of the reasons why he was killed by intelligence, and also Martin Luther King and why he was also killed? Like a lot of people don't talk about how he was against capitalism. So can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Fred Hampton was a leader of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, and he was murdered in his bed while he was sleeping. And he was murdered because he was doing something really amazing. He had united all the different gangs of Chicago from different races into a rainbow coalition. And he was running a free breakfast program for children. And he had a massive organization in Chicago of working class people that were organizing against capitalism. And there's actually a very good film, a documentary you can watch, The Murder of Fred Hampton, that just has a lot of footage of Fred Hampton speaking. I mean, it shows the amazing community organizing he was doing, plus the ideological side. He was pushing communism. He was teaching communism, no question about it. So Fred Hampton, who was killed, they called it a vicious Panther attack in the media. But then, the Black Panther Party organized tours of the apartment, and it was very clear that all the bullets were going one way. It was just an assassination. It wasn't a vicious Panther attack. That this was a political assassination of Fred Hampton, 1969. But you can also read about, Dr. Martin Luther King in the final years of his life. He started organizing a poor people's campaign, he called it. And his last book, called Where Do We Go From Here?, talked about how employment should be guaranteed and that people should have the right to a job. He built a mass movement. He was talking against the Vietnam War. He said that the American government was the greatest purveyor of violence on the earth. He talked about the fact that a war on poverty was needed. He was planning to organize mass civil disobedience of working class people in Washington, D.C. to demand better, Social Security and better welfare programs. And at the time he was killed, he went to Memphis, Tennessee to support sanitation workers who were on strike. The sanitation workers of Memphis, Tennessee were on strike. They were marching with signs that said, "I am a man." And Martin Luther King was killed. I mean, he was killed outside his hotel room in Memphis, Tennessee. But when it really gets down to it, he was shot down on a picket line. He was there to support striking workers on a picket line. And Martin Luther King was shot on a picket line. I mean, Martin Luther King, his issue was civil rights. He was a Christian minister. But at the end of the day, he died just like so many socialists and communists and revolutionaries in this country have, like Joe Hill, like others. He died on a picket line in the class struggle. Martin Luther King in the final years of his life, when he was talking about class, he was what all these synthetic leftists like to call a class reductionist, right? He was talking about the class struggle, God forbid. He was talking about the right to a job, the right to education, economic rights. He was supporting and sympathizing with the Vietnamese people and their struggle against American imperialism. He was never a communist. He was never a Marxist, but he was very much opposing capitalism. And that is when his life was taken.
Yeah. One thing I noticed about synthetic leftists, when you encountered one that you debated, Vosh, is that they prey upon people who lack knowledge in foreign policy, knowledge in history. And ever since that debate and ever since that channel grew, a lot of people who say the things that you say, like how we have to reach out to other people with different ideologies but are still working class, they call us fascists, they call us Nazis or neo-Nazis or Hasbulls. What are some things that Vosh was saying that is just not true about our foreign policy, or assumptions he was making about our foreign policy or our history, that you find very concerning?
Well, a lot of these people use words they don't know what they mean. Okay, when people say the word Nazbol, what is a Nazbol, right? Some people, I think they think that that means, most people, you ask them what a Nazbol is, and they think, well, there are these people on the internet who are communists, but they're kind of like Nazis. So they're Nazi Bolsheviks, they're Nazbols. That's not what that word means. Okay, that is not what that word means. There was a political party in Russia in the 1990s, and it was dissolved in 2007, and it was called the National Bolshevik Party. And it was a party that mixed Russian nationalism with Marxism. And it was a breakaway from the Russian Communist Party, and it dissolved. It no longer exists. I've never been a member of that party. I don't know anyone who has. The main thinker for that party, from what I understand, was a writer, Edward Limonov, who just died. And he wrote novels that had like LGBT characters in it and stuff. Like, he was kind of seen as kind of edgy and liberal. And in Russia, the Nazbols were considered to be a left-wing party to some degree or other. So, I don't know. I've never met them, never associated with them. They were dissolved when I was 19 years old. But people on the internet who are sympathetic to opposing imperialism are not Nazbols. That's just silly, right? Another word you hear is Strasserist. What is a Strasserist, right?
Sounds like a dinosaur.
Yeah. In the Nazi Party, there was a faction of people that were followers of a guy named Gregor Strasser.
Mm-hmm.
And on the night of the Long Knives, Hitler killed all the Strasserites, and Ernst Rem, and some of the founding Nazis hated Jewish people with all their heart and soul, killed and murdered communists on the picket line, strike breakers, violent people, but to some degree or other, they believed in like the socialism part of National Socialism. They wanted Hitler to like nationalize the property of the rich or something like that. Well, as Hitler started moving toward coming to power, he realized that that he needed to make an alliance with all the wealthy German capitalists. So he really watered down what it meant to be a Nazi. And the National Socialism part just meant as long as corporations are patriotic, it's fine. And then after Hitler had been in power for a year, some of the people in his party were still talking, the way that Gregor Strasser and Ernst Rem and some others talked, and so he killed them all. I have nothing to do with those people. I don't hate Jews. I don't hate anyone on the basis of their race or religion. I'm not encouraging people to go out and commit acts of violence in the streets against communists and leftists. So, I got nothing to do with Strasser. That's just a non sequitur. Tanky. Well, what is a tanky? Tanky just means you support existing socialist countries, right? That word goes back to the British Communist Party. In the 70s, you had the rise of something called Euro-communism. 1978, the French Communist Party, the Italian Communist Party, the Spanish Communist Party all signed a document denouncing the Soviet Union. So in Britain, there is a debate. Should we go with the Euro-communists or not? Well, the people who supported the Euro-communists, they were called the Euro faction, and the people who supported the Soviet Union were called the Tankies. And why is that? Because Soviet military interventions were portrayed on television with tanks, right? It was like a propaganda thing, right? There's a great book called Afghanistan, Washington's Secret War. And it's written by a reporter who was stationed in Kabul in Afghanistan at the time the Soviet Union sent its military to support, the government of Afghanistan. And he talked about how, all kinds of Soviet people were sent there, but there was one tank in the whole city of Kabul in a park. And that's where all the news media surrounded and pointed their cameras at. All the Western media pointed at this one tank, because that is how Soviet military interventions were portrayed on American TV. Is these big tanks, right? When the Soviet Union sent soldiers to Czechoslovakia, big tanks. When the Soviet Union sent soldiers to Hungary, big tanks. Soviet Union sent soldiers to Afghanistan, big tanks, right? Tiananmen, 1989, in China, tanks. And that was a very calculated propaganda move by Western imperialism. Because, they didn't show, like, the millions of people in Afghanistan who didn't want to live under the Taliban and wanted women to have the right to vote and wanted women not to get acid poured on their faces and liked the idea of the Soviet Union sending aid to, like, develop their agriculture. They didn't show you the millions of people in Czechoslovakia who wanted to keep their guaranteed job and health care and education and didn't want the free market to come ruin the country. They didn't show you the people in Hungary who didn't want, neoliberalism and free market reforms. Instead, they made it look like the only force, the force of opposition to the CIA-sponsored protesters is just this cold mechanical piece of machinery. It's Darth Vader, rolling over the individual. It was a brilliant propaganda tactic. Because at the end of the day, those tanks from the Soviet Union represented millions of people in every country of the former Eastern Bloc. Every single one. Romania, Czechoslovakia, Poland, every single one of those countries, they do poll after poll after poll. People say that life was better before the Soviet Union fell, before the overthrow of communism. So those tanks were not just cold pieces of machinery. They represented millions of people who didn't want communism overthrown. They may have wanted communism to change. They may have wanted communism to be more democratic. They may have wanted more of a market sector. They did not want free market capitalism. And what happened in Eastern Europe in the 1990s when they restored capitalism was a humanitarian crisis. Drug trafficking, sex trafficking. I mean, Russia in the 90s lost 10% of its population. 1 in 10 people either left the country or died. They had a food crisis in the country. It was a nightmare. All the farms shut down pretty much. The factories closed their doors, 30% unemployment. Around all the subways, you had elderly folks, begging, older folks who'd lost their pensions and were like trying to sell you yesterday's newspaper or their old sock. Just give me a little bit of money for this old sock so I can go buy some food. I mean, Russia in the 1990s, when they adopted libertarian free market economic policies, was a nightmare. And the restoration of capitalism all across Eastern Europe has been a nightmare. And most of Eastern Europe hasn't recovered from it. Russia, Putin has come in, he's nationalized the oil and gas, and he's been able to kind of reboot the economy. But Lithuania, Czechoslovakia, a lot of those places have really suffered. I mean, they have not, recovered. It was the Soviet Union that wiped out illiteracy in those countries, that built hospitals in those countries, that paved the roads in those countries. The tanky narrative that, the Soviet Union, which is this cold mechanical piece of machinery crushing the individual, that is a very effective piece of propaganda. But the term, it comes from that divide. So if you're calling someone a tanky, basically you're saying if someone's a tanky, they're Angela Davis, right? Angela Davis, right? The great, black freedom fighter. She was a supporter of Eastern European socialism. If someone's a tanky, you're basically saying they're Albert Einstein because he defended the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Someone's a tanky, they're Nelson Mandela, who admired the Soviet Union, admired Fidel Castro, admired North Korea, admired Gaddafi. If someone's a tanky, you're saying that they're Helen Keller, who called the Soviet Union the rising star in the East and praised the Soviet Union. Tanky is not an insult as far as I'm concerned. I do encourage people to admit some of the flaws of socialism as we've seen it, to learn not just from their successes, but from their mistakes. But being someone who is associated with the history of really existing socialism, the movement that defeated the Nazis, the movement that conquered outer space, the movement that raised millions of people out of poverty, is nothing to be ashamed of. It annoys me, these PragerU free market people, they have this meme that they make, and they say, oh, capitalism is great. Look, in the last 100 years, this many million people have been raised from poverty. How many of those people have been raised from poverty by the Chinese Communist Party, right? Mm-hmm. 800 million raised from poverty by Chinese communism. Who made Russia an industrial superpower? Who built the power plants in Egypt? Egypt didn't have electricity until Abdel Nasser, a socialist, and the Soviet Union teamed up to build the Aswan Dam. Socialism has raised millions of people out of poverty. It's capitalism that keeps countries all over the world in states of chronic poverty and underdevelopment, right? Look, if countries have to beg, when I was a kid, I went to church and they would always get up and they'd want us to donate money so that we could build a well in an African country. There's poor people in some African country, they don't have a well, donate some money. Well, if you keep a country in an economic situation where the people have to beg from Westerners, please give us money so we can get a well, you're not really helping them. Socialism comes there and it builds a modern water system, and it builds water treatment facilities, and it builds power plants, and it raises these countries up. We in the West, we keep these countries impoverished. The free market libertarian policies beat down the economies of these countries, and then we raise money in our churches to build a well every so often. I mean, this is not solidarity, right? Capitalism is keeping the world poor, and socialism is the road to raising all humanity out of poverty.
Yeah, and wouldn't it be accurate to say 100% of the time that the U.S. intervenes in a country for humanitarian reasons or because we want to defeat those evil communists or whatever. Isn't it 100% of the time the people end up worse than they were before the U.S. intervened, except for maybe like World War II? Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean, I've said many times, show me a single place where they've made life better, right? Let's go over the record, right? U.S. overthrew the government of Libya. How's Libya doing? Used to have the highest life expectancy on the African continent. Look at Libya now. How Syria, the USA has been trying to overthrow Assad for how long? How's Syria doing? Iraq, right? Saddam Hussein, oh, he's this evil dictator. How is Iraq doing? Yugoslavia, right? Serbia. How has Serbia been doing ever since they got rid of Slobodan Milosevic and the socialist government there? Right? You can go all over the world. Never has the result of U.S. intervention, really, except for like the Second World War, been successful. And even the Second World War, I mean, it was the Soviet Union that liberated much of Eastern Europe, and it was like about building a barrier against the Soviets. I mean, it was, there were certain global conditions. And a lot of those countries were already industrialized too. But like, look at Latin America, right? Nicaragua is a socialist country, right? Compare Nicaragua, where they have the Sandinistas in power, where they've, raised millions from poverty and wiped out illiteracy and had big achievements. Compare the conditions in Nicaragua with the conditions in Honduras. Honduras is a free market country. In 2009, the CIA, Hillary Clinton, they overthrew Manuel Zelaya, the socialist leader. And now Honduras has one of the highest murder rates in the world. Yeah. Guatemala, a country that, we overthrew their socialist president Arbenz back in the 50s. Ever since then, it's been a string of U.S.-backed dictators like Rios Montt, who committed genocide. What's Guatemala like? Not good, right? People say, oh, communism in Cuba is so bad. Well, compare the way Cubans live, the way Haitians live, or the way Jamaicans live, or the way people live in the Dominican Republic. I mean, it's pretty clear that socialism has had big successes around the world, but you're never allowed to say this. Even people that, and that's what's so sinister about the synthetic left, is it trains socialists to go along with that narrative. I've heard my whole life, communism never worked, never achieved anything. That's malarkey. That is just utter nonsense. But if you listen to Vosh, you would agree with that. Mm-hmm. If you listen to the synthetic left, if you read Jacobin, you would agree with that, right? And they want you to think, oh, well, communism's never worked because it's not really communism. Just means you and your friends open a pencil factory together and share the profits. No. Communism is when the working class takes control of the means of production, when we raise people out of poverty with a centrally planned economy. And the ultimate goal of communism is a world that is so prosperous and so abundant that the need for the government itself fades away. And we can have a world based on so much abundance and prosperity that we can have each live according to their needs and each act according to their own abilities, right? That's why I tell people the slogan, abolish billionaires, is not a good slogan, right? I'm against Jeff Bezos. I'm against the billionaires that run American capitalism. But they're not bad because they have money. They're not bad because they have wealth. They're bad because they got it through exploiting people. They're bad because they got their money by making other people poor. The goal of socialism is a world with so much abundance and so much prosperity and so much wealth that we don't even need a government. And that would require basically all of humanity to be richer than the richest billionaires are in our time. In the Soviet Union, they used to say that every worker was a millionaire. Every worker in the Soviet Union was a millionaire because they owned railroads and they owned steel mills and they owned TV networks and they owned satellites, and every worker in the Soviet Union was a millionaire in that sense, right? And in China, I mean, the socialist system there has enabled millions of Chinese people to become very, very wealthy. And the goal of socialism, and it's important to say this because, again, if you live in a left-wing bubble, you don't want to say this. But if you're talking to the broad masses of people, it's important to point this out. If you say abolish billionaires, many Americans have it in their head that socialism means the government comes and takes everything they have, right? That's what they've been told, right? Communists are against owning stuff, right? And socialism is the government comes and takes everything. Well, you have to explain, no, it's the opposite. Communism means the state controls the economy so that you can have more stuff than ever before. And everyone can have more stuff than ever before. We have a rationally, centrally planned economy so that the wealth, the personal property, not the private property, not the business property, but the stuff that people actually use, like their house and their car, that people can have more material comfort than ever before. We don't want to take your stuff away. We want to take control of the banks and the factories and the oil wells and the major centers of economic power so that we can create a world of prosperity and abundance. And we just have to get out of people's minds that socialists want to hurt them and want to make their life worse. We don't want to make their life worse. You're not a socialist if you want to hurt average Americans, right? You're not a socialist if you want to make life worse for average American working people, right? And that's what these folks don't understand. And synthetic leftism, that's a whole rabbit hole we can go down. There is a weird, confused element in the synthetic left that if you listen to them talk, I think they actually do want to hurt average Americans, and they're not my comrades.
Yeah, and another thing that's consistent with them, like we mentioned Russiagate and them falling into all these other mainstream narratives like the OPCW report and censorship. But another thing is that they think that we can accomplish things just by with incrementalism, which is why they kept bullying people into supporting Joe Biden. And then if you don't, then you're helping Trump, you're helping fascists, not realizing that Joe Biden is himself a fascist. I mean, he's the author of the '94 crime bill. He was an architect for militarizing the police under the Obama administration. There's never been a war he didn't like. When in history has incrementalism ever worked, right? Has there ever been a case in history?
Well, look, I mean, there are some folks who felt that Biden was the better candidate in the elections.
Right, yeah, I understand that part, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I was not convinced. I was open to it. If someone could convince me of that, I would hear it, and I understood the concerns. I did not vote for Trump. I mean, what Trump said about immigrants abhors me. His economic handling of the pandemic has been a nightmare. But at the same time, I was not convinced Biden was better. I mean, there were a lot of things about Biden. I mean, and we'll see. I mean, now Biden says he's going to turn things around with the pandemic. Let's see it happen, right? Right now, I'm a little bit worried about this vaccine situation, but he's only been in office for a week, so let's see. I'm open to the possibility Biden might be better. But at the end of the day, the notion that that voting for Biden is going to get us anywhere closer to socialism is ridiculous. Okay. I mean, Biden represents just another wing of the rich and powerful. And a lot of the rhetoric from Biden supporters about Trump was not coming from a good place. Their rhetoric seemed to be, Trump is bad because he's hurting the ability of the United States to dominate the world with NATO. Trump is bad because he's stirring up, average people. And Donald Trump, Donald Trump shows we need to censor the internet more. Stuff like that makes me think that a lot of the Biden criticisms of Trump are not the same as average working people's criticisms of Trump. And Kamala Harris, I wrote a whole book about how scary she is. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden has a pretty horrendous record on all kinds of issues, both domestic and internationally. What I don't understand is why doesn't the cancel culture apply? We're supposed to cancel Jimmy Dore because he talked to some anarchist kid, anarcho-libertarian kid, whatever. Joe Biden voted for the Iraq War that killed millions of people, right? Kamala Harris tried to execute a man who was innocent and block DNA evidence that would have gotten him, freed. Kamala Harris tried to kill somebody, right? That's attempted murder in my book, right? I mean, if you have evidence that could acquit somebody and you try to prevent it from being put forward because they'll get the death penalty, that's attempted murder, right? Telling us there's weapons of mass destruction when there weren't any and justifying a war that then kills millions of people, that's pretty murderous in my book. So I don't understand, why are you not canceled for associating with Biden or canceled for associating with Kamala Harris, but we're supposed to cancel Jimmy Dore for talking to some kid? Some kid with funny right-wing ideas? I don't get it. Get it. But I do get it, actually. They're foot soldiers of the same wing of the ruling class that Biden's a foot soldier for at the end of the day. And that's why a lot of this anti-fascism is cheap. It's very, very cheap. Look, fascism itself is a mass movement of violence and terror. And when fascism is coming, at that point, the only response at that point is self-defense, and that's a very serious situation. But fascism tends to come after a failed revolution. Fascism is like the last resort of the ruling class when there's a danger of socialist revolution on the horizon. There is no danger of socialist revolution in the United States right now, right? The socialist movement is so confused and doesn't know what it stands for. Germany had a revolution in 1918 that failed, and the communists were still massive, and then fascism came. Spain, they had a mass revolution that overthrew the monarchy, and the communists were in a coalition government, and so fascism crushed the coalition government. Italy, after World War I, had a massive revolution that failed, and Mussolini came in there. The ruling class of the United States doesn't really need fascism right now, I can tell you that much. They might want a more authoritarian state, but Biden probably wants that too. right? I don't think Biden's opposed to that. He wants the internet more censored. And in fact, because Trump's wing is the weaker wing of the ruling class, they tend to be more civil libertarian. I think Biden, at this point, has positioned himself to want a more authoritarian police state than Trump. So, I mean, yes, it's possible that different sections of the ruling class want more authoritarianism. That is not what fascism is. Fascism is a mass movement of violence and terror and mass destruction to save capitalism. It is the seizing of power by one wing of the ruling class, viciously crushing other wings of the ruling class. That's not happening here, right? There's elements of it, and coming from both sides. Honestly, I think there's a lot of Silicon Valley fascism. Honestly, and I think that there's fascism coming from the Biden wing of things as well. Honestly, I mean, if you look at what Silicon Valley believes and Malthusianism and the social engineering stuff, there's a fascistic edge to both wings of the ruling class. Neither of them are on the brink of taking power and instituting a fascist state, though.
Yeah, and there's a lack of consistency there too with the people who are canceling Jimmy or canceling people like you who may talk to somebody with different ideologies that may be right wing. Like, how come Anna Kasparian doesn't get canceled for talking to Madeleine Albright and interviewing her and giving her such a very softball interview, right? Or why doesn't AOC get canceled for taking pictures with the Bolivian coup organizers?
Yeah.
Right.
Or Navalny now in Russia, right? This guy leading all the protests. Yeah. Bosch and all of them support him. He's a white nationalist. I mean, he's actually a white nationalist. He said that the people in the Caucasus Mountains were cockroaches. He hangs out with neo-Nazis. I mean, he made a video, saying that the people in the Caucasus Mountains and other ethnic groups in Russia should be exterminated. He's an ethno-nationalist, but he's against Putin, so they like him. I mean, it shows what shills these people are. They're just, and the thing is, a lot of people follow them and don't know any better. A lot of people who are getting interested in socialism, the game is rigged and the algorithms are rigged so that these people become who you go to if you're interested in socialism. And that's why they're so dangerous. And that's why they exist. The ruling class would probably prefer nobody talk about socialism. But now there's such a groundswell from below because of the conditions created by capitalism that they have to have somebody talk about socialism. So they find a couple shills. They got Jacobin. They got the CIA folks at the head of DSA. And that's how the game is rigged. And that's why I'm building the Center for Political Innovation, to try and push back against this.
Yeah, sadly, some of these people think that they've found their way out of the matrix, but they're still in it because these people that they listen to on YouTube are still repeating mainstream media and intelligence talking points. Glory Jones, thank you, contributor to the show as well. Thank you so much for the super chat. She asked, what are Caleb's thoughts on tourist economies and or Western imperialism in the Caribbean?
Tourist economies?
I mean, yeah, like the ones in the Caribbean.
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, Cuba has developed their tourism sector mainly because of the fact that after the fall of the Soviet Union, the embargo from the United States has made it almost impossible for countries around the world to buy their sugar. During the Soviet times, the Soviets actually subsidized Cuba by buying their sugar. In the Soviet Union, they have sugar from beets, right? They get sugar from beets. But they would buy the Soviet Union's sugar at an inflated price, and that was a way to subsidize Cuba. The Soviet Union would buy sugar from Cuba at an inflated price. And so they restructured their economy to be more tourism-oriented. But they still maintained an economic base. There's a lot of factories in Cuba. They make a lot of cigars. They make a lot of rum. They have cars there. And, I mean, there's a lot of industry in Cuba. But if you look at countries like Jamaica, you look at countries like the Dominican Republic, the Bahamas, places like that, they don't have very much industry. Right? They're not very developed. They are just kind of, I guess what you're referring to as tourist economies, in the sense that they're not developed well enough because, these countries do have big problems of poverty and suffering. And yes, a lot of Americans go there for vacation and stay in resorts, but the overall living conditions of the economy haven't been raised. Before the revolution in Cuba was like that as well. I mean, Cuba, it was a gambling hideaway for a lot of Americans. Would go there for vacation. The mafia had a lot of power over there. But average Cubans were not living very well. So I guess I hope that answers your question. I can go for a couple more minutes, and then I need to call it a night because my voice is getting a little bit tired.
Yeah.
But
that's fine. Yeah, just the last question that I have is like, what can we do as Like you have your Center for Political Innovation. Like, what can everybody else, like the audience members, what can they do to combat synthetic leftism? I know you mentioned that you're not an activist anymore, but do you support activist movements? Like Mao and other communists always emphasize political practice guided by theory as the source of correct ideas. So, what are your thoughts? What's your advice to the audience members?
For years, when I was a socialist activist, I was constantly saying to people, get in the streets, get in the streets. We need more protests. We need more protests. And then 2011 happened. It's coming up on, I mean, it's now at this point, it's been 10 years. 2011 happened. There was the Wisconsin protests in the Capitol. There was the Arab Spring. There was Occupy Wall Street. And then there was the Chicago teachers strike a year later. And protests go on in the United States all the time now. Black Lives Matter protests, protests against police brutality, protests around economic issues. There's all kinds of protesting going on in the United States right now. The problem now is not a lack of people going out and protesting. The problem is that the people protesting it are ideologically confused, right? Protests and rebellions are made by circumstances, right? Spontaneity. If you read Lenin's book, What is to be Done, he talks about spontaneity. Right? When people are angry at a police state or at their economic conditions, they go out and protest. The revolutionary movement, their job is not to just make people protest. Their job is to point those protests in a way that could actually overthrow capitalism. Because left to their own devices, these spontaneous protests are just going to go back into the system. They're going to be co-opted. And the important thing that needs to be done now is what is not being done, which is ideological education. And that is what I am dedicated to doing with the Center for Political Innovation, is we need to start educating people. People need to understand class struggle. They need to understand Marxism. They need to understand anti-imperialism. And, right now we're having a pandemic, so, the ability to hold public events is limited. But, we have been having web conferences every month. We have printed a number of books. We've reprinted Gaddafi's Green Book. We published my book on Kamala Harris. We are about to come out with the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual, which will be a compilation. It'll have some socialist writings in it from Marx and Lenin and others, but it's going to have a study guide in the back, which will enable it so anybody with that study guide could lead classes and discussion groups about the important revolutionary concepts. And we're on the brink of publishing this educational manual. And people all across the country, it's going to be very cheap, and people will be able to start organizing their own socialist education projects. But coming out of the pandemic, we are going to start having live in-person events around the country. We have a lot of resources together. We have a lot of volunteers and people who want to work with us. And we are going to start having massive socialist educational events around the country where people come and they learn what socialism is all about, and they get full of revolutionary energy and passion. My vision is for us to have socialist meetings that are like rock concerts, or socialist meetings that are like going to a really exciting, indoor political rally or something like that. Socialist meetings that are really educational, socialist educational weekend retreats where people get to know each other and study and engage with each other and learn Marxism together and build kind of a community. I hope that eventually some community service can happen. Feeding people, building socialist food banks and socialist clothing drives for single mothers and such. That there needs to be an aspect of service to the socialist movement as well. It can't simply be protesting and all that. There needs to be a constructive attitude. People need to understand that socialists want to make life better in their community, and that they'll actually do the work in doing it. So, my vision for the Center for Political Innovation is a big one. But every day I meet new people. I mean, the number of people that contact me on a daily basis saying, hey, I want to get involved. What can I do is massive. And we're at the beginning of something special. Look, I tell people that if you look at every revolution in history, it begins with the socialist movement in that country turning around. The Chinese Revolution started when Mao said it's time to go to the countryside. It's the peasants who are going to make the revolution. The Russian Revolution started when Lenin got together and he said, we need a party of a new type. We need this new type of party that's actually going to do it, right? You can talk about the Cuban Revolution, that if revolutions actually happen, the movement, the socialist movement that just kind of has always existed in that country, it has to dramatically take a turn toward actually getting things done. And usually that's a turn to the masses, right? And in China, it was a turn toward the peasantry, toward the peasant masses who would make the revolution. And it's time for the socialist movement in the United States to take a turn toward the masses. I say out of the movement and to the masses. I'm done trying to recruit, the people in the protest cage. I'm done trying to recruit the campus Trotskyite socialist reading group. I want to get to average people in working class communities in Ohio, where I'm from, or Texas, or Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin. I want average Americans who are tired of seeing their homes foreclosed, tired of seeing their relatives get busted by the police, tired of seeing opioids destroy their communities, to say, you know what, the problem is capitalism. The answer is socialism, and we're gonna study what happened in Russia. We're gonna study what happened in China. But at the end of the day, we're gonna develop a uniquely American form of socialism, a kind of socialism that could work in this country, address the contradictions of this country, and we're gonna win. And we're gonna win. And we're gonna save America from capitalism. We are gonna save the world from the crimes and the horrors of American imperialism. We're gonna build a whole new world. We're gonna build a United States that cooperates with countries around the world, is part of the Belt and Road, that trades on the basis of win-win cooperation. We're gonna rebuild the United States on new values of brotherhood and sisterhood and cooperation. We're gonna uproot all the horrors of racism and settler colonialism and all things that have gone on. We're gonna build a whole new America. We are gonna save America from the horrors of capitalism. I am not a socialist because I want to destroy America. I'm a socialist because I want to save America. Capitalism is destroying America. They don't need socialists to destroy America. Capitalism's already doing it. Look outside. They're destroying America, right? We're the people that want to save America. We want to save average Americans from the horrors of this system. We are the most patriotic people around. We are the most kind and charitable people around. When average Americans think of a Christian, somebody who loves their brother and wants to build a better community, they're thinking of a true communist. When people think of an upstanding, patriotic citizen who loves their country so much, they're thinking of a communist. They've got it all wrong. Communists are not vandals and destroyers. Communists are builders, and that's the kind of socialist movement we need. We need a mass constructive socialist movement to save America.
Caleb Maupin, journalist and socialist from RT. Thank you so much. You're very generous with your time. Where can people find you?
I'm at calebmaupin.com, but check out my YouTube channel. I'm always streaming on there. And we have a great community around the streams. We have our running jokes about unnamed diet beverage and all kinds of things. So, join our YouTube live community. There's a few hundred people on there usually, and it's great. So yeah, get involved that way. If you want to get involved with the Center for Political Innovation, shoot me an email, and I can plug you in. We have, weekly Zoom calls, and we have our web conferences, and we're going to start spinning into action, within real life organizing as this pandemic, slows down. We're going to start doing the reading groups and the public events, et cetera. So, a lot needs to be done. I mean, these are desperate times. A lot needs to be done, but it will get done. I'm confident. I believe in tomorrow. I am an optimist. You have to be an optimist if you're a socialist. So there you go.
Yeah. Thank you again, Caleb, so much for your time. And to everybody else, don't forget to stay informed and definitely check out Caleb Maupin.